The desperate need today is not for a greater number of intelligent people or gifted people, but for deep people. Are you a deep person? This is the Encounter Podcast.
Bam, 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 bam.
Bible with Bam.
Bible with Bam.
Bible with Bam.
Bam.
That was beautiful.
It's all right.
This is the Encounter Podcast with me, Sam.
And me, Becky.
Welcome. This is a podcast about faith and encouragement. Over the course of this series, we will be exploring and learning about what it means to go deeper with God, using spiritual disciplines as a basis for our growth. We will be following Richard J. Foster's writings on the celebration of discipline, whilst bringing in guests to talk about their own experiences and journeys in faith. Have you actually read the book?
I have read the book.
That's good. That makes one of us. I'm guessing you're going to be the sort of intelligent, expert sort of person.
And you'll just be the over-enthusiastic, quirky host that asks all the questions, right?
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah. Good
Fantastic.
dynamic duo.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we'll get away with that, to be honest. Normally we'd do lots of other kind of bantery things, but I don't think anyone really wants to listen to that, to be honest. So we'll probably just crack on.
Get straight in there.
So since you've actually been reading the book and we haven't really told anyone what it's about, would you like to explain a little about it?
Absolutely. So a quick little overview. We have been reading The Celebration of Discipline, which is a really practical intro into the Christian disciplines, or Christian practices, if you like, and how we can use them to deepen our relationship with God. The book basically splits the disciplines into three types. The inward disciplines being meditation, prayer, fasting, and study. The outward disciplines being simplicity, solitude, submission, and service. And finally, the corporate disciplines of confession, worship, guidance, and celebration. And the real heart behind this podcast is to equip each of us with tools to deepen our personal relationship with God in a time with no physical church meetings. We so often rely on the church for our faith, and when asked which place you associate with the words serving and worshipping, church is often the first place that comes to mind. But in this time of lockdown, when physical church meetings have ceased, there's no worship nights with atmospheric notes, no meals to be prepped for Alpha, no rushing to church in time to put out the chairs. It's just us and God. And the silence can be deafening. It's sometimes so hard to choose to worship on our own. So that's the aim of this podcast, to take inspiration from a wide range of Christian scholars to explore some ancient Christian practices and encourage one another to rediscover worship and connecting with God in new ways.
Yeah. I'd say not rushing to church has actually been one benefit that I've found, considering I can sort of get up when I want and I'm never late.
Yeah, you're still late to the 10:30.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be at 10:30, does it? Like, I can just put on YouTube and watch it whenever.
Yeah, that's the beauty, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what it's going to be like when we get out of lockdown. I feel like I'm going to struggle quite a lot.
What day are we on?
Well, within this episode, we thought we'd ask the question, do we even need disciplines in our faith? And if so, why? I realise that's two questions. And I think to answer this, we need to take a step way back and explore what comes to mind firstly when you think of the word discipline.
It sounds like a scary word, right? These days we think of being told off or strict rules to abide by, but luckily that's not what we're after in this podcast. We can see the disciplines a bit like categories.
Yeah, so a bit like how we have different disciplines of sport within the Olympics.
Exactly, except we are invited to be part of any or all of the disciplines. We don't have to be world-class athletes to experience them all.
That's good.
Yet, through using them, through experimenting with them, they can be invaluable tools that we can use to connect with God.
Right, so if they are such invaluable tools, why are they not talked about or common within modern day
Mm.
Christian life? I mean, if I'm honest, I had no clue what the Christian disciplines were until we looked at this book. And the notion of Christian meditation kind of conjures up images of monks
So true.
rather than something that I could relate to in my life. So why do you think that people don't utilize them?
That's a really good question. And I think if we're honest, a lot of people are scared of going deep in general. I think this fear comes from two main sources. Firstly, the fear of being vulnerable. I think we're scared to go deep with our friends, we're scared to go deep with our family, scared to go deep with God, because being deep with someone, by definition, requires us to be vulnerable with ourselves. Soren's Kierkegaard, still can't pronounce his name.
Søren,
Soren.
Søren Kierkegaard,
Kierkegaard, um,
I think.
puts it like this. He says, the matter is quite simple. The Bible is very easy to understand, but we Christians are a bunch of scheming swindlers.
Ooh.
We pretend to be unable to understand it because we know very well that the minute that we do understand it, we're obliged to act accordingly. Christian scholarship is the church's prestigious invention to defend itself against the Bible, to ensure that we can continue to be good Christians, but without the Bible becoming too close.
Yeah, that's definitely relatable.
And I think being vulnerable forces us to think about our thoughts, which makes so many people uncomfortable. So much of the time, it's much easier to bury the things that trouble us rather than spend the time to pray and unpick it. Spending time with God seems to reveal so much about the world and about ourselves. It transforms prejudices, reveals injustice, and shapes our calling to align with God's heart, which can be a lot.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think a lot of struggles in both human relationships and especially our relationship with God stems from our own aversion to be real and honest and deep. At the beginning, if you remember, the quote stated that the world is crying out for deep people. For example, right now, people that question deep-rooted prejudices and reveal systematic and subtle injustices. And I wonder, in a really practical way, how can the Christian disciplines help with this? How can we use them to become deep people? And how will they help us grow to be more Christ-like in our actions?
That's a lot of questions.
Yep.
But to unpick them, I think we can use the Bible. So, one passage that has really stood out to me lately is John 15. In it, Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you will bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. It's a pretty well-known passage, and it seems so simple, right? In order to bear fruit, or in other words, be Christian-like in our actions, we just have to remain in God. But remaining in God so often slips our mind when we go about our daily life. How easy is it to miss starting our day with prayer when we're late to work on a rainy Monday morning? The truth is, if we don't make a habit of remaining in God, then we can easily go through our week without connecting with Him at all.
Exactly. And I guess the practical way in which we as Christians can remain in God is through scheduling the disciplines into our own routine.
Mm.
And each time we meditate or fast or have times of solitude or even prayer, we are taking time to consciously reconnect with our central vine and to ground ourselves.
But also, I think scheduling isn't necessarily about a set time or a set place, although
True.
this can help. It's about having a connection with God, which allows us to know when to fast, when to pray, when to be quiet, when to be loud, when to study, and so on. And I love this image of us and God, just like the vine and the branches, being in constant communication. A branch on a tree never sits there feeling lost and wonders, oh, I wish I could find a way to absorb all the nutrients from the soil. No, it knows that as long as it stays connected, the roots in the central vine will transport the nutrients from the soil to the outer branches. And in the same way, if we stay connected to God, we know that He will reveal more of His character to us and more of His heart to us. And the more revelation of God's heart, the more we understand how we should relate to others.
Yeah, I'd never really thought of it like that. But what about those who are a bit skeptical of all this?
Well, my first thought a couple of months ago was definitely, oh, meditation isn't really for the likes of me. I'm not theological enough. But the root of it was I was hesitant about experiencing God and kind of scared what physically may happen when I let God in. Therefore, I think I was in danger of settling for a lukewarm faith, but I was really missing out on so much more that God wanted to show me. I think it's so important to know that God's heart is relational. God created you, He formed you, and He knows you more intimately than anyone else. He is so worthy of our trust and our time.
Yeah, I think that really relates to one of the quotes in the book, actually, that literally says that these disciplines are for everyone at every level of faith, which is so cool to know. In fact, it says, we must not be led to believe that the disciplines are only for spiritual giants
Mm.
and hence beyond our reach, or only from contemplatives who devote all their time to prayer and meditation. Far from it. God intends the disciplines of the spiritual life to be for ordinary human beings, people who have jobs, who care for children, who wash dishes and mow lawns. In fact, the disciplines are best exercised in the midst of our relationships with our husband or wife, our brothers and sisters, our friends and neighbours.
I love that. Best exercise in the midst of our relationships.
Yeah, and following from that quote, the next question would be, how can the Christian disciplines help us think about life and purpose in a different way?
Well, I have another quote here from Donald Coogan, which is stated in the Celebration of Discipline as well, which gives such a beautiful perspective on how we should do life. Donald Coogan says, I go through life as a transient, on his way to eternity, made in the image of God, but with that image debased, needing to be taught how to meditate, how to worship, and how to think. And I think it's so crucial to what it means for our purpose on this earth. As Christians, we hear time and time again that we are made in the image of God. That's our identity as Christians. But it's difficult to relate to the image of God if we do not know God intimately and personally. How are we ever to discover our identity, our calling, and what it means to be human if we don't know the image in which we were originally designed? I think this quote literally answers so many questions that we struggle with. We desperately need to understand the image of God in order to understand ourselves. And to understand God, we need to constantly and personally connect with Him. And what better time to do that than now, when we don't have to be worried about traffic on the way to church or being on the chair team? COVID-19 has brought us so much pain and so much grief, and it's heartbreaking the devastation that it's caused. But it has also given us the most beautiful gift of time. And I just wonder, have we been using that gift wisely? What would happen if we committed time to discover a new way to connect with God and give a new way a try?
Yeah, and with that, I think it's really important to remember that none of us will ever be experts in these
Mm,
disciplines. In fact, Foster himself puts it perfectly by saying, we do not want to be beginners, but let us be convinced of the fact that we will never be anything else but beginners all our life.
yeah,
And I think
so true.
I definitely feel that way most of the time, to be honest. But God isn't calling us to be experts in our actions or become finely tuned machines. We need to remember the heart of all of this and the reasons for growing in these disciplines. We need to remember that we can't attain God's love through a point system. The disciplines aren't a bonus level to bring us above others. As children of God, His love towards us is unconditional and unfailing. Yet the disciplines help us to hear His voice more clearly and to have an active faith.
Yeah, I think on the surface of it, it can be a little overwhelming.
Hmm.
Connecting with God in these ways, it's not physical, it's intangible, and there's no checklist of how to do it. And while each person will connect with God in different ways, I think taking inspiration and trying out some of the classical disciplines is a great practical way of committing our time consistently. Another quote from the book says, "The path of following these disciplines does not produce change. It only places us where change can occur. And this is the path of disciplined grace." And I think that's exactly what these disciplines do. They are simply tools to try and connect with God, to help the deep within us cry out to the deep within God, to sort of quote that psalm, and gain his wisdom and his understanding. And who wouldn't want a bit of that?
Exactly. And well, that brings us to the end of this section. I mean, there was a lot to unpack there,
A lot.
but over the coming weeks, each episode we will focus on one of the disciplines at a time to really understand it and put it into practice.
And putting into practice is something that we both will be doing each week too, within our own lives, as we discover more about them and read more into them. Some may be more challenging than others. I know that fasting may be interesting for you, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, I need to face my love for food, really. But, you know, we shall see how it goes. And at this point of the podcast, we would be welcoming our lovely special guest, usually to chat about their experience or connecting with God. However, as this is the pilot, we don't actually have any guests right now, so you're going to have to settle with us. But today we will have our guest, which is, drum roll please,
Dun, dun, dun.
our very own Becky.
Hello.
Maybe doing a different voice so they think it's a guest.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, maybe not.
I cannot do accents to save my life.
So in this section, we thought we'd sort of rip off an encounter idea. Sorry for that encounter. And ask some questions about desert island faith. And normally with our guests, seeing as we wouldn't really know them, we sort of ask them who they were and what they do. But for this, seeing as you're the host, we thought we'd just crack on with questions, if that's right.
That's fine.
Awesome. So my first question is, if you were going to go to a desert island, that's the obvious bit, what is one thing that you would take with you in order to develop or encourage your faith? It can be anything from a physical item or even to a memory.
Oh, I think my natural response to that would be something musical, because music is 100% how I naturally connect with God. However, on a desert island, I would have plenty of time to try something I usually wouldn't do. So I think I would take like a book of Psalms. Something I've really wanted to do for a while is get stuck into the Psalms and use them as a tool for prayer. I'd like to think that maybe getting stuck on a desert island with a Psalm book would give me a good opportunity and the time to do that. However, similarly, I've also been stuck in the house for 14 weeks and I haven't really read Psalms once. So we'll see if how that goes.
Yeah, I think we all feel like that sometimes. Well, a similar question to that, what would be one thing that in the past has really helped and developed your faith that you would take to the island? And again, this can be an object or a memory or maybe a moment that has elevated your faith.
I remember last year I read Dirty Glory by Pete Gregg. That book taught me so much about real and honest prayer, and I think consistent prayer is something that a lot of people struggle with. But Dirty Glory is so practical and it's bold and it's challenging. It taught me so much about God wanting sort of a real day by day, hour by hour conversation with us. It's not sort of once-off prayers in church. It took me about 4 months to read, which is a really long time, because I kept on going back and rereading bits, because it's so practical and it gives you sort of little things to try out. It developed my prayer life so much and opened my eyes to a God who was really relational and so willing to walk by my side. So yeah, I'd love to reread that and rediscover more on prayer, I think.
Cool. And finally, what is one thing during this period of lockdown that has really challenged you through your faith?
It's weird that as soon as God places something on your heart, like every sermon you listen to or conversation you have seems to point to that central theme. So recently I felt this curiosity to connect with God on a deeper level than I have been, which I think stemmed from the beginning of lockdown where I felt slightly lost. I realized that so much of my faith was based on action, and I get so much out of serving in different churches, and I lived in a Christian community house, which is an amazing environment for action. However, the lockdown took all of those external factors that connected me and God away. I began to realize that internally I wasn't doing that much to foster my independent relationship with God. And when it was just me and him on a Sunday morning in my lounge, it became a struggle, and the distance between me and God was so noticeable. It struck me that it's not the church's responsibility to maintain my faith. It's not anyone else's responsibility to maintain my personal relationship with God. It's just me and God. And I realized that my quiet times and my individual connection needs to be a solid core, which I kind of explains the curiosity for exploring the disciplines, I guess, and wanting to, find new ways to connect with God individually.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. That was a really honest and interesting look at those questions. And yeah, we'll both see how that grows, I guess, over the next couple of weeks or months as we look at these disciplines, and maybe we'll try and keep you accountable to those.
We live in hope.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for being our guest this week and also the host. You've kind of done everything.
Jack of all trades, master of none. That's me all over.
Oh, I don't believe that. Well, that sort of concludes the pilot podcast.
Dun, dun, dun.
Amazing.
We winged it a bit, didn't we?
Nah, I think we got away with it. Well, I mean, shall we finish with the theme tune?
Oh, I'm not sure anyone could tolerate listening to that again.
No?
No.
I quite liked it.
Yeah, okay.
All right, well, if you think that's true, then maybe we shall simply leave them with the quote that we started with from R.J. Foster. The desperate need today is not for a greater number of intelligent people or gifted people, but for deep people. This has been the Encounter Podcast, and thank you for listening.